It is about to start recording. I guess it's
It is
recording now.
recording.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, so first off, hi, Ian. How are you?
I'm a little stir crazy, but I think we all are at this point.
Pretty much. Yep, pretty much. This is my friend Ian Wiese. Ian
How about
Wiese.
we start that again and make sure you do it correctly instead of doing that?
Nah, it's good. Ian, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, as you said, my name's Ian Wiese. I am a student composer at New England Conservatory, getting my doctorate in music composition, also a minor in musicology. And I've had a lot of performances in the Boston area, New York City, across the U.S., Norway, and even Walt Disney World.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Um, Ian, we met at North Carolina, right? South
Yeah, the
Carolina.
Charlotte the Music Festival.
Yeah, Charlotte New Music Festival in North Carolina. Uh, was it 2017 or
It
16?
must have been, yeah. I think it was
Yeah,
2017.
yeah, it was 2017. Um, anyway, I met Ian at this music festival, and we sort of maintained friends kind of ever since. Yeah. So today we are just going to be talking about some real basic music fundamentals kind of stuff, you know. We're going to be kind of focusing on scales a little bit and intervals today. Um, so first off, Ian, I know that for me, like as a musician, like I was talking to you about this earlier, I always think of scales as like patterns, and I always just kind of envision either like what started off as like a fretboard because I played electric bass, right? So I have this image of
Yeah.
a fretboard and a pattern, and then I kind of learned how to visualize that pattern on a keyboard over the course of like my studies, and that's really how I think about scales now, is in terms of just like a shape or a pattern. Um, I don't, how did you kind of think about this?
Well, originally I thought about it in terms of the patterns, but as we discussed a little while ago as well, I started getting more into microtonal stuff. So I actually started thinking about.
Sorry, first off, can you kind of explain a little bit, just a very little bit about microtonality?
Okay, so microtonality is the idea that there's actually other pitches that you can utilize beyond the 12 that we use for our chromatic scale on a piano. There's things that are smaller, there's things that are larger, there's things in between, there's things that not even map to the piano correctly.
Of course. So in a way, it's like these are kind of the notes that exist between the notes, if that's a layman
Yeah,
way of
there's
saying
notes that
it.
exist between notes, there are notes that exist when you combine all these notes together,
Yeah.
and there's notes that you take those notes in between the notes and the notes that exist, combine them to make new ones.
Right. So sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. Now you were sort of explaining how you think just about a scale.
Yes, so by my training with microtonality, now I actually think more about scales in terms of sense steps and
Hmm.
different variations in how you add integers together to create compound intervals.
So sense, and you said steps, right? Sense
Yes.
steps. Now I know that uh, for like a lot of like audio majors, audio engineers, like the terms sense and what
Hertz.
Hertz, there we go, that's the one. These are much more tangible to sort of people that work in a digital audio workstation or with oh, sorry, my dog. Uh,
That's how you know this is live, everybody.
right. Hang on just a second. I'm gonna stop this. All right, sorry about that. So, where were we?
We were talking about steps in terms of sense and how that
Oh,
relates more to
right.
audio engineers.
So, I'm sure like sense and hertz make much more sense to some of the audio engineers kind of out there. But for someone who has never maybe encountered these terms before, what is a cent for instance, not like 100 pennies make a dollar, right?
Well, actually, in some ways, you can think of it that way. When we talk about cents, we are, of course, relating our discussion to an octave in music.
Sure.
So if you think about it, there are 12 steps that make an octave.
Right. We can call them half steps or semitones, right?
Yes. We have the 12 half steps that make up an octave.
Right.
But when we talk about them in terms of cents, much as you're saying 100 pennies make a dollar, we would actually think about the half step or the semitone as the dollar.
Mm.
So 100 cents equals the semitone or the half step.
Ah. So then we could say in an octave there are what, 1,200 cents?
Yep, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
So if you're thinking about it in terms of cents and numbers, 1,200 cents makes the full octave because you have 12 semitones to form the octave at 100 cents apiece.
So, okay, I've actually never really talked about this before. And that kind of makes me think, or I understand like why divisions of that are way more important now. So for instance, we divide the octave into 12 equal parts, right? Essentially, for every 100 cents, we get a semitone.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why do we sort of group them in the way that we do in terms of whole steps and half steps? Why do we have that sort of major scale pattern? I mean, that's kind of a loaded question. Not so much why, but
I was going to say the why starts getting into philosophies of what equal temperament is.
Well, okay, so then now that's a really cool concept, right? Equal temperament, I think, is a really interesting concept. And I'm pretty sure that does have something to do with like the creation of a basic major scale, doesn't it?
Well, the way that we use it on the piano, yes, it does, because our octaves, all of our octaves are tuned to the note, each of the same note. So all our C's are tuned to C's. All
the A's are tuned to A's, right?
Yes. So by doing that, we've standardized every note will have a specific pitch, not a specific frequency, a specific pitch.
Oh, interesting. So there's a difference between frequency and pitch.
Yes. When you go up in range,
sure,
your frequency becomes higher.
Sure.
And when you go lower in the range, your frequency becomes lower.
Oh, I see what you kind of mean there. So then, okay, if we are to try to like just create any given scale in like let's say an equal tempered system, because we live in equal tempered land. Let's stay there for now.
I mean, I don't necessarily, but that's
right for everyone else. So we sort of like live in equal tempered land where we get 12 even pitches basically. And we can think of these in like a lot of different ways. Like once we sort of establish that there's 12 of them, right? There's only 12. We just get those 12 and that's it. It kind of seems like there's not that much stuff going on, but I guess for me, I've lately been thinking of each of those pitches as like 12 distinct colors in a way. You know, it's like we have sort of 12 primary colors with music, right? And we just get sort of lighter shades, brighter shades, you know, the higher up the pitch, the brighter the shade of it is, right? And we get sort of lower shades of those pitches, right? The lower they are in frequency, I guess, the lower the shade of that pitch. And for me as like a musician, I've been really thinking about just how to like use these pitches just in different ways, and finding ways of organizing all of these things.
Well, that's where, of course, the major and the minor scale come in, as organizations of those colors.
Right.
Finding the ones that go well together, necessary, if you want to think of it that way.
Yes. So, I mean, the difference let's talk about just a major scale versus a minor scale for a
Hmm.
second. Um, you're familiar with your solfege, right?
Yeah,
Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. I know in my class I reference the Do, re, mi song from Sound of Music like all the time. Uh,
that is the quintessential
right,
method
right.
to learn solfege in
Well, I
that
mean,
way.
do, a deer,
A
a
female
female
deer.
deer, right? Like Ray, a golden drop of sun, duh. Like everyone knows this, you know? And it's like
Me, I made my call myself.
fa, a long, long way to run.
We are such dorks.
Yeah, we are. It's okay. But so I do with needle and a thread, right? La, a note to follow, so
So,
T,
tea, drink with jam and bread,
and that brings us back to
back to dough.
do, 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 right? The funny thing is, in that song, I think it actually arpeggiates a one chord, but they just say do, 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 I think. Or maybe they do say the solfege. I can't remember.
No, they go do, 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 do. I didn't quite hit it
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
necessarily.
But yeah, they sort of like arpeggiate whatever that chord is, you know? Uh,
Just a C major chord.
yeah, yeah, right. Uh, anyway, so those like solfege syllables, those are our basic, like that's what I learned as a major scale, right? Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, do, ti, la, so, fa, mi, re, do, right?
Okay, can you pause for just a second? I want to ask you something before we go forward.
Oh, okay.
Well, yeah. Sorry about that.
All right. So we definitely, in my class, we use the solfege syllables as like a movable do. We've talked a little bit about fixed do. In fact, actually, one of my students, she is from, I don't remember which province in Mexico, but she learned fixed do, and that's actually been a kind of a challenge for her to overcome because movable do is, for me, it's a really easy concept because that's what I learned. But I'm starting to realize that for people that did not learn that system, it's kind of a challenge to think in a different way, you know.
Yeah, I
Um,
can relate to that actually because the New England Conservatory, we do fixed, like all
yeah.
the international conservatories do. But when I did my undergrad at Ithaca College, I should have mentioned that I went to Ithaca College as my undergrad. They did movable.
Right, right.
So
See, oh,
I'm familiar with both, but it became a bit of a curve as your students having to change systems.
right, right. Um, I think, for me again, like I was in choir, and like that's just what I learned was fixed do, and we just related every starting pitch, whatever our key center was, as do. Like that was note one, right? In our major scale, we have the scale degrees 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 8, the
Hmm.
octave, right?
Which is
One
just
was
one again.
right, exactly, which is the same thing as do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, you know?
Hmm.
Um, excuse me. So we would just call the starting pitch do. Or our choir teacher would just tell us what pitches we started on, but it was always some form of do, mi, or so, right? It was always like a one chord of some type. Um,
Yeah, a major one chord
right, a
usually.
major one chord, a major triad. But anyway, so we would always have the notes do, mi, and so, right? And those are very important notes in sort of these major and minor scales. Specifically, like to me, I think the third is one of the really important notes, and we wanted to talk about the differences between the major and the minor scales, right? And to me, that third is really important. Now, what I was taught was to think in terms of like raising and lowering specific parts of the scale, and I have come to find out that maybe that's not the best way to describe it in terms of raising and lowering. Um, Maybe it would be better to think in terms of like intervals based around like your starting pitch or something else. Even I don't know. But
Yeah, this is where again the sense come in because that can help you
right,
determine which way you need to go
right,
and how many 100s as semitones you need to add to create the intervals of your major or your minor scale. As we
right,
know, the major scale is comprised of a whole step, a half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step.
right. That's a pattern that my students have come to learn quite well at this point, which is That's a good way, I think, of learning how to construct a major scale.
Hmm. And all that really means is in order to make the minor scale, you shift that pattern over slightly.
Right. So this is actually kind of related in terms of the relative minor of any given scale, right? Now
Hmm.
you're talking about shifting that pattern over. That's an interesting way of thinking about it, actually. Sorry, can you elaborate more on that?
Yeah, so if we're thinking about the major scale being major, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step, when you start on a relative minor scale, if you think about it, you're actually starting, assuming 8 steps to the octave here,
Right, right.
you're actually starting on scale degree 6.
Right. That's something that we've talked about in my class. Is the relative minor of your given major scale is pretty much always going to be based on your sixth tone, right? And sorry, what are the names? It's tonic, supertonic, mediant, predominant, dominant, and then submediant, right? So the submediant, that sort of is your relative minor. Now, something that I think is really important to note is that it only works one way, right? Like you can only go to scale degree 6 to find your minor from a major scale. The same is not
Yes.
true if you go the other way from a minor scale finding the 6th scale degree. That is not the same thing, correct?
No, you will actually enter into a totally different land known as modes,
Yes,
which we're
right.
not going to talk about because that's a bit of a rabbit hole.
Oh, yeah, right. Scales go deep, guys. Now, so this major and minor thing, I want to get back to this idea of like shifting the pattern. Um, so something I think is important to note in this is that we can think of these scale degrees moving forwards, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or in backwards, right? Not really in reverse, but just moving backwards.
Reading everything backwards.
Yeah, right. So we can start on scale degree 1, but that's the same thing as scale degree 8, right? Which is
Hmm.
do to do, right? And if we are going in reverse, we get, let's on a major scale, right? Do, ti,
Ti,
la,
la, sol,
do,
fa,
fa,
mi, re, do.
right? And the same thing again is true with the numbers, right? 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now, if we are trying to get to that relative minor scale, we have like two ways of getting there, don't we? Well,
Mhm.
at least two ways of getting there, I guess. You can
Right.
count up or you can go
You
down.
count up to the 6th scale degree or count down from 8 to the 6th scale degree.
Right. Or do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, right? Or do, ti,
Do,
la.
ti, la.
Right. Um, now, essentially when we're starting a scale kind of on that sixth scale degree, all the intervals in that scale, they all stay the same, right? All the steps, they stay the same. We're just starting on a different note, correct?
Yes. So if we're starting in the relative minor of C, which would be A minor,
Right.
we're just taking the interval pattern of a C major scale and starting that pattern on step 6
Right.
rather than on step 1.
And all of the intervals, it's like the intervals aren't moving, right? We're just kind of shifting where we
Yeah,
start the
we're shifting
pattern.
our starting point.
Right, right. The intervals themselves are kind of fixed in a way. Like from C to D is always going to be the same spot, right? And if we
That'll always
start
be the 200 cents between C to D.
exactly, there's always going to be 200 cents between C to D, right? And there's always going to be 200 cents between D to E because that's another whole step,
There's
right?
always going to be 100 cents between E to F because that's a half step.
Right. And this is true essentially once we kind of fix where that pattern is, we can take that pattern and potentially move it to a different note, but that pattern will always stay the same, right?
Yep.
So for instance, if we were to think in terms of let's say the key of A, right, or an A major scale, so we would have the notes A, B, and C sharp. Those would be our first three notes, wouldn't they?
Yep, those would be our first 3 notes, and they would all be 200 cents as whole steps,
Right.
no
So
matter
then
what.
the total number of cents between the 1 and the 3 would be what, 400 cents total?
Yep, 400 cents.
Interesting. Okay. So 400 cents is the same thing as 4 half steps,
Yep. Which would
right?
then form your major third.
Exactly. And now that major third, that is kind of what defines, to me, I think the major third has always been what's defined like a major scale. Because, we get the major 6 and the major 7, but those scales also exist in in the melodic minor scale, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
and the one thing that is true, I guess, between all the minor scales, at least, is they have what's called a minor third, right?
Yep, in the minor triad, you will have the minor third
Right,
as your first interval, which provides you the context of what that chord is,
right. And
or what your scale will be.
these triads, uh, these triads are what we can think of as kind of like an arpeggio of a particular scale, right? So
Yeah, if we want to talk back in solfege for a second, your major triad would be do, mi, sol, mi, do.
right, major triad. Now, if we wanted to make that into a minor triad, right, what do we have to do?
In order to make that the minor triad, we have to take that mi and lower it down 100 cents to make
100
me.
cents. Exactly 100 cents.
Yep. So give me $1 and I'll make you a minor triad.
Right. Sorry, ain't got no monies here, man.
We're musicians.
Yeah, man, seriously. So, let's see. Now, we know the solfege to make up a major scale. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, right?
Yes.
Now, what happens when we try to do a minor scale?
Well, to make a minor scale, we have to take some of those intervals, particularly mi, la, and ti, and lower them down by 100 cents, which alters their syllables.
Right, right. Now, I think that this is a really interesting concept, actually. The concept of solfege and the syllables. For instance, the syllables mi, la, and ti, right? Mi and ti are both ending in the e vowel, which is very forward, right? It's kind of like e. When you
Right,
speak
yeah.
it, yeah, it's right here, And whenever you're singing, it for some reason, well, it's not for some reason. There is a reason why, but like your placement of your vowel really matters, right? So people who kind of speak farther back in their throats, they tend to sound more flat versus people that sort of exist in this land of being really far forward,
They
and
sound
it's
really sharp.
right.
And
It sharpens the note, right? So I kind of think that these vowels actually matter for how we sort of make these sounds, right? For instance, me and t, again, those are very
very
forward vowels, right? And they want the note to be kind of sharpened a little bit.
And no coincidence, those are where your 100-cent steps are, your half steps
Right.
in the
And
major scale.
I think it's really important too because T is our leading tone essentially, right? And that takes us back to tonic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it wants to reach up there, And
It's known as a
me,
tendency tone.
exactly, right. It has a tendency to pull our ear toward that one note. Me is the same thing, right? It's a half step away from fa,
It
and me
wants to
kind
move
of
up to fa.
right. And so we want that sort of that tension, and I think those syllables really have a lot to do with that. Now, la is a nice neutral sound, right? It's kind of like re. Those are both very neutral sounds, right? And they don't necessarily
Along with
want to
do.
go. I'm sorry?
Along with do, that's a very neutral sound too.
Right, do. And none of those pitches, they don't really want to pull our ear anywhere, right? So those neutral sounds, they kind of just sit and kind of stay there, right?
Yeah, do, re, fa, la. They just want to
Right.
chill
They
out.
just kind of just hang out. And even when we alter the syllables, I think the same thing is true, right? Because, for instance, our minor syllables move from the first 3 notes move from do re mi to what's known as do re me, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that vowel really wants to kind of pull back a little bit. It's neutral in a way, right? Kind of like re is,
But
but
it's also a little charged. It's not wanting to be there necessarily.
yeah, right, right.
It wants to kind of move back into re because it borrows the a sound from re.
Exactly right. It's sort of borrowing that same sound from re. Now, uh, in terms of pitch, right? If we're thinking just all white keys on the piano, a basic natural minor scale would just start on A, right? And we would have A, B, C.
Mm-hmm.
And this is essentially the same thing as La Ti Do, right? But because we're starting it on, like we're starting our scale on a different pitch than C, and I think it's just much easier to think in terms of movable do, so that we start on do, right? So wherever the start of our scale is, that is the note do. So in this instance, if we're starting on white key A, can you give us an A real quick?
La.
Sorry, Ian definitely has perfect pitch, and I try to say utilize that. So what was it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to be the one who goes and abuses that. Every time somebody has perfect pitch, you go, "Oh, I have perfect pitch. I have perfect pitch." I'm not like that.
That's funny. Sorry, what it was?
La.
Yeah. So if that is our A, we can.
Yeah.
There's the octave. We can just kind of use that pitch space, use these intervals to kind of sing the scale, right? So we have A, and then if we were to go up, it would be B, right? And
Yeah,
then
close
we make
enough.
it
C,
C, right?
D,
E, E,
E, F,
F, G, and
G,
then
A.
A,
We're a
right?
little
And
off, or there's a little bit of a rub.
yeah. That's probably me. But we get we get that basic octave, Um,
But by
now,
traversing the minor scale, what we've actually done is gone whole step, half step,
right,
whole step, half step, whole step, whole step.
right.
What did we
We've
just do there?
we just essentially like instead of starting on C, we kept the same interval pattern, and
We shifted our major interval pattern,
right. That's
kept
all we've
that
done.
static, and changed the starting point.
Right. We use the exact same notes as C, right? The exact same notes as C major. We just started on the note A, and that, I mean, you can sit and just start to count like all the cents or the half steps and like really try to get in like into it. But I mean, at the end of the day, man, it's like you have a major scale, right? And you're starting on a different note of that major scale. It's like we all know what a major scale sounds like, you know. Just randomly pick a note, and we can just sing a major scale based on that note, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's
You
see.
want me to actually do that?
Yeah, give us a note, Ian.
Let's see. You have to forgive me. I got a little bit of stuff in my throat as well.
It's all right. We're all.
It's not that. Trust me.
Okay, so Ian, give us a note. Oh, fa, as in F. F, the note F.
Yeah, you'll be better up there.
Yeah. I can start there, but I can't go any lower than that.
Maybe you should start the octave up just so that you're not killing yourself.
Oh, we're doing this. Let's let's do just an F major scale then.
Yeah, okay. So, now I also have to think about it in movable do again, because as I said, NEC has trained me to do fixed.
Okay. Let's do movable do then.
Yes.
No, let's just do note names.
No, I can do it.
No. I want to do note names.
Oh, you want to do note names?
I want to do note names because we're doing an F major scale, right?
Yep.
Okay, so
F.
F. So let's try this. 3.
Well, it's gonna be what it is because there's gonna be latency.
Of course, let's do it. F G A
B
flat. I've already lost it. What's the next one?
C
E And then
D, E,
E, and then
F.
whew, good. We got one different note in there, didn't we? From a C
Yeah.
major scale.
Fa, sol, la, si, do, re, mi, fa.
See what he did there? Fa, sol, la. What was that note?
C.
C. Now, Ian, why did you use that different yes sound?
Okay, so you're a student from Mexico who learned fixed will definitely appreciate this because
Yes.
the telltale sign of somebody using fixed do is that we don't actually use T, we use C for B.
Yeah. That's that has actually always confused me because C to me is a raised 5.
Yes, that there's a whole etymology behind it. I'm not going to get into it because that's not really necessary.
Sure, right. Uh, just know that like solfege syllables have changed quite a bit since their first creation. Thanks. Who is it?
I think it was Guido di Arezzo
Guido.
with his hand.
Yeah, Guido. Uh,
Yeah,
anyway,
and yeah, it all
yeah,
came
right,
from the hand.
right. The Guidonian hand, man. That's some old school stuff right there, right? uh, so with one thing that I really focus on with my class is thinking in terms of solfege, right? Thinking in terms of numbers, but also like what notes make up a scale, right? Because again, it's like, okay, we've kind of unpacked kind of what makes up a scale, right? We have whole steps and half steps. There's a pattern for a major scale: whole, half, whole, half, right? Uh, and then
The minor scale is an adaptation of that pattern.
right, which a permutation.
Adaptation.
Could it be a permutation though? I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe not.
A permutation would mean that it's the same pattern but different. Like
Yeah, right.
but
right.
quite literally, it is the same pattern, just a different starting point.
Right.
You kept the pattern static, but just changed where you're starting.
Right. Yeah. So it's an adaptation, definitely.
Yeah.
And we sort of unpacked like the sense idea, right? There's 100 cents in one semitone, right? So that means there's 100 cents in one half step. So there are 200 cents in one whole step.
And by discussing the nature of the triad, we also discovered that there are 400 cents to your major third.
Right. And that 400 cents to your major third is really important. Now, we sort of hinted at this earlier, like the difference between a major third and a minor third, right? There's a clear sound, right? C to E is a major third, and that sounds different than A to C, which is a minor third.
Do, mi versus do, mi.
Yeah, somewhere in there, right?
Yeah,
now,
I re-hit the E again. I realized it was off at the drop. Do, mi, do, mi. Yeah, there we go.
I always had a teacher that described it as the sound of it's a disappointed mother. Johnny, something like that.
Yeah, another teacher of mine described it as the calling motif, the minor third.
Yeah.
Coming.
Coming. Something like that, yeah. That's what I had it described to me as. Now, so it stands to reason then that if a major third has 400 cents or 4 half steps, then a minor third, which is made up of 3 half steps, would only have 300 cents.
Yes, that's exactly how the math works out.
That is math, everybody. Yay. So
yay, we're all pre-calc now.
Yeah, I know, right? So, but I mean, we're not dealing with like massive numbers though. It's like, okay, we're moving everything by hundreds, which is like moving everything by just single decimals in a way, you know?
Yeah, it's basically, if you take away the zeros, it's moving by 1.
Right, exactly. So it's not like this is real heavy math by any means. For those of you that are really into this kind of thing, right? Music in a Western system, right, with our 12 equal tones works in a base 12 system. Now, I definitely don't want to get into that because
Yeah, because then it starts getting into modulus.
Right. And then math becomes real quick. So
Yes.
with these minor scales, right? We've been kind of skirting around this for a little bit now. Um, the biggest difference, what would you say between a major and a minor scale is, Ian?
Well, the biggest difference would ultimately end up being the sound of the scale because of
Right.
that difference between the third being major and minor.
Right. A lot of people will describe this as happy or sad. I know that in my music appreciation classes, for instance, I describe major versus minor as happy versus sad. Some people kind of see it as bright versus dark. That's a way that I've been trying to look at it lately.
That
Um,
makes more sense to me because if you listen to something like, klezmer music, that's all in minor keys, but that's not sad music.
right, exactly. Um, I really like thinking of pitch and just music in general in terms of color. You know, it makes a lot more sense to think of these things as just different colors that we can hear, um, and it really just kind of reminds me of this Frank Zappa quote, right? Music is how you choose to decorate your time, or something like that. It's real philosophical, I guess, in that respect. um,
Well, let's not talk about philosophy because right now I'm reading about the philosophy of music regarding Immanuel Kant
uh,
and Hegel and Nietzsche and Schopenhauer. So
but yeah, real heavy stuff for a different time.
yes,
um,
an elegant weapon for a more civilized time.
right, exactly. So okay, minor scales, relative minor. That one's really easy, right? We basically just shift the pattern over, start on the sixth scale degree, right?
Yep, you take your major pattern, start on scale degree 6.
Right. Now, when we're comparing the differences between major and minor scales, this is kind of where I like to think in terms of parallels. So the difference really between a relative and a parallel is that a relative minor is related to whatever major scale we're kind of working with, right?
Yep, and the parallel is you start on the same note, the same do in this case,
Right.
and have to adapt it to a minor scale.
And this is why I think that movable do in this sense is a little bit easier to kind of grasp, because again, do can be any note, right? And if we're starting in C major, then we know we have do re mi fa sol la ti do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if we're starting on C minor, we know we get do re mi fa sol la te do.
I don't think we actually mentioned that la and ti become le and te.
Oh, whoops, you're right. So in this minor system, we have to alter specific tones, don't we? We have to alter
Yes,
specific intervals
and we alter, as we said before, mi, la, and ti.
from
We
the
make
major
it,
scale, right?
yep, and we make it really easy on ourselves and turn them into a versions. So me,
Eh,
le,
eh,
and te.
te. Yeah. And basically, each of these are just 100 cents less than mi, la, and ti, aren't they?
Yeah,
Right? 100 cents less, or one half step smaller, you know? Um, and so we can really use these syllables, these cents, these numbers, all of these things to gauge just the distance between these pitches, which we've been referring to as intervals, right? Interval, the distance between pitch. So the interval of a minor third can be described as the same thing as the space, or as the same thing as 300 cents between two notes, right? The interval of a minor
yep.
third. Um, so let's kind of talk about some of those notes, I guess. So for instance, in a C major scale, C to E natural, that's going to be a major third, right? We
Yep,
can
that will
hear it.
always be major third, 400 cents.
Right, 400 cents. That's what 400 cents sounds like, essentially, is the note C to E, right? It's also the same thing as the note do to mi. That's always going to be 400 cents, do mi. So if we just simply say use these alternate syllables, do to me, right? Do to me is always going to be 300 cents,
Yep,
which in terms of pitches if we have C to E, right? And we know that we want to make that into a minor third, that we just need 100 cents less, right?
To
What
make
can
the
we,
new note.
right, to make the new
syllable.
note. And so essentially what we're doing is we're taking that major third, just making it a little bit smaller, right?
Cutting
And the
100
process,
cents off of it.
right, we're cutting 100 cents off that note. That, man, I like that. That's so easy to think of. Sorry.
That's
So
why I've taken it and used it quite a lot. It's actually
yeah,
really easy to do it
yeah.
that way.
So, okay, we take this major third, we cut 100 cents off of it, right? Now we have 300 cents. So what do we actually call that note now?
In which way are you asking?
In terms of C. So if we have C to E, right, and we take that E and we cut 100 cents off of it.
Now we have C to E flat.
C to E flat, right. So,
or do to me.
Right, do to me. So do to me is that constant 300 cents, you know? And then, so it's like, are we do to me? Are we using like dollars? Are we using euros? Are we using pounds, right? Do to me, say dollars, right? America, yay, dollars, do to me. But
Yeah,
then C to E flat, right? You can just say like, okay, we're using euros.
Give me
there.
one more. You have $4, give me one. You have $3, now you have your minor third.
Right, exactly, right. And the way, like, just how you sort of call these pitches, what the system that you use, it's like you have apples and oranges and grapes. They're all fruits, you know, like they're just different types of fruits. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, te.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of the different forms of the minor as well.
Right, because I just outlined a melodic minor scale there, didn't
yes, you did, which actually is a perfect segue.
So we get three types of minor scale, or three basic types of minor scales, right? We only get the one major scale. And to me, everything is kind of based off that major scale.
Yeah, it's all about bringing back in bits of that major scale for harmonic reasons.
Yeah, right. So, again, we talked about what makes a minor scale, right? The minor third, the lowered sixth, and lowered seventh. And something that we alluded to earlier, that I did at least, is that I think the minor third is the most important one, right? Because we do have multiple types of minor scales, and they all share a minor third. But the 6 and the 7 is not the same amongst these different scales.
Yes, this is why I mentioned specifically having the term tendency tone from before.
Right. What my class has learned, we call it the leading tone. But a leading tone is a type of tendency tone.
Yes. Tendency tone is the broad umbrella definition of where pitches want to move in certain ways. But in the context of a scale, your leading tone, he's right. Go with what he's saying.
Yeah, your leading tone is a tendency tone in the sense that it wants to go back to do, right? I mean, we've done this in class so many times where we play a major scale and I just stop on 7 and it's like, okay, where's the next note, right? You know it, you hear it because you have that tendency tone right before it.
Its tendency is to want to go into that resolution.
Right. So, and this plays into the other types of minor scales that we have. Now, the first one that we talked about was the natural minor scale, right? That's basically when we just take a major scale, shift it over, start on that next note, right? And we get our natural minor scale. We don't change, we literally change nothing pitch-wise, right?
Yes, I'll ask you a question.
Pitches. Okay.
I'll ask you a question here. What, as a result of this lowering, what has changed, particularly in the end of that scale?
So it matters, though, in terms of which scale we're talking about. Now, if we're talking about just a natural minor scale.
Yes, that's what I was referring to. In a natural minor scale, we've taken the pattern and shifted it over.
Right.
What has changed? It's important.
If we're thinking in terms of numbers or solfege syllables, what changes is the 3rd, the 6th, and the 7th, or mi, la, and ti. Yeah, or if we're thinking of like pitches, right? Let's just say C major and we shift it down. The notes, I don't want to think about that actually, because the notes don't change, right?
The notes do not change.
Right.
The function does.
The function of them does change, right? And that's when we get into the numbers and the solfege syllables. So if we're thinking in terms of solfege, mi becomes the syllable me, la becomes the syllable le, and ti becomes the syllable
te.
te. So those three are the ones that change.
Now, what's important here, I'll follow this one up. If we're just talking about how in a major scale we have a leading tone, what is out in a natural minor scale?
If we want to keep the leading tone, you mean?
No, what I'm saying, if we have a leading tone in the major scale, what don't we have in the natural
Right,
minor
right.
scale?
We don't have a leading tone in the natural minor scale, right? And that's a major difference between the major and the minor, the natural major and the others. The
Good
fact that
pun.
we don't have a leading tone.
Very
Now,
good pun. Major difference.
Right? So that leading tone, in my class we call it a subtonic because it's one lower than tonic.
Yes, that is the name of them. Every single one of these functional pitches has a name related to dominant,
right?
Super dominant, sub, median. Yeah,
Right.
they have all that.
The tonic, the median, and the dominant. They have some relation to those things, right?
Yeah.
It's man, I stumble upon those things all the time. Every time I come up in class, I'm just like, is this the leading? It happens to me because like I don't think of it like that very often, except in terms of this class.
I don't mean to subvert your class in this way, but the practical matter of the situation is we don't actually think of it as
right.
The subtonic or the super median.
Right. It's the third or the sixth or it's the second, like it's the seventh. That's what I think of it as, and I think of it in terms of numbers all the time. I think the numbers are sort of way easier to interpret in a practical sense, because like for me as a player, like especially when I'm doing some, this comes up a lot in terms of like lead sheets and reading. It's like if I just have chord symbols, then I'm thinking of numbers, the numbers that make up those chords, and like it's a lower third if it's a minor chord, things like that. Now,
or in my case, when I do a lot of serial writing,
right?
Don't give them that just yet. That you think about pitches in terms of fixed numbers all the time. So it's just easier to deal with numbers.
Yeah. The number system, I think, in a practical sense, is like the best way to go about it. However, though, I have been getting more into this concept of note names and just spelling things out more. It's different. It's a lot more like a fixed do system, but just using note names for everything.
Yeah, I'm sure for jazz that actually is more practical application, but for serial composition, not necessarily.
Sure, right. Yeah, I understand that.
Anyway.
So we're just talking about the differences between minor and major scales, right? So
yes.
The natural minor has that big difference of all three of those tones are being altered. And specifically, though, there's no leading tone, right? There's no tendency tone in that. Well, there is a tendency tone. It's just not.
It's not in the right place.
Right, exactly. Now, we have two other types of minor scales, right? The natural minor is the most basic one. But if we, for instance, add a leading tone, right? Because a leading tone is actually really pleasant to hear. And it draws our ear to that tonic, right? To our starting pitch again, because it has that tendency to want to go back. Yep. So that leading tone is really important.
Short of having dominant 5-1, the 7-1 is the strongest.
Right. Now, the first scale that I sort of talk about in terms of these altering things is the harmonic minor scale. Now, I don't want to get too far into, excuse me. I don't want to get too far into sort of harmonic practice of this scale so much as just the intervals that make up this scale. And there's a real specific interval in this scale.
Yes, and as we were talking about, it's regarding scale degree 7. Get that leading tone back. Because we've already, in the natural minor scale, lowered scale degree 7 down 100 cents to make te. We just add that 100 cents back to get the leading tone again.
Right, exactly. So our solfege syllables become do, re, me, fa, sol, le, and then we get ti, right? That extra 100 cents back. Now, between le and ti, we've done something there. Normally, La and ti and te and le are both just one step apart, one whole step, or 200 cents apart. Now, in the harmonic minor scale, right, this changes, doesn't it?
Yep, and because we've added the 100 cents back onto already what's a whole step, we've actually now comprised what you could call either a minor third, which is not really correct, or more correctly, an augmented second.
Right. Now, this concept, augmenting, I like to think of it as we're just expanding something that's already kind of big. You know, we're augmenting it. We're expanding this thing more, as opposed to diminishing it. Right? We're making it smaller. Right. So if we add 100 cents to an interval, we have essentially augmented that interval in a way. But it also matters where it exists in terms of like notation space, right? Pitch space.
Yes, this is why I said, although technically it is 300 cents and you could call it a minor third,
right,
it is not actually correct to do so.
Right. So
when you write that out, let's say, for example, I'm just going to assume we're in A minor for a second.
Okay.
You have A, B, C, D, E, F. That's so far what your minor scale would be.
Right.
To make it natural minor, we would put G.
But
because we've added the extra 100 cents, we have to make that G sharp.
Right. And now we have a leading tone, which is 1/2 step below our tonic, right? And has the tendency to pull our ear up to that tonic note.
Yes, but if I were to write A flat there, that would be incorrect.
Right, because we have we have to have all the letters, you know? Like, you can't just skip a letter, right? Like, it's like
if we skip the letter, then we remove what the note's function is.
Exactly, right. That's a big deal, because A flat has a different tendency than G sharp, right?
Yep. G sharp wants to go to A, and A flat would want to come down to G. Despite being the same note, the way you spell it matters.
Exactly. Now, the way that we spell it also has a lot to do with how we're using that note, too. This is kind of related to why it's a harmonic minor scale, because it gets used in a minor key to draw our ear to a very specific note, right? We're using that tendency tone.
I think maybe we should back off on that for the moment, because that starts getting into the
harmonic.
Of what this is.
Exactly. So that, though, it is the biggest difference. Maybe not the biggest difference. Really, it's the only difference between a natural minor and a harmonic minor scale, right? That augmented second.
And just for when you are doing this as solfege, it is going to be a little weird to sing that augmented second. We don't generally do this in music, except when it comes into this situation here.
Right.
This is actually the only acceptable moment, really, without starting to get into really esoteric practices where you can have the augmented second. Yeah,
generally, we want to avoid that interval, because it's an awkward thing to think about, F to G sharp, right? It's like, it's awkward to think about, and it's kind of, it's not difficult to play, it's like,
The practical thing, if you are singing it, that I found is to think about it in terms of the minor third, but not to actually write it as the minor third.
Of course.
For whatever reason, it's easier for us to think about a minor third than it is to visualize an augmented second.
Right. I think probably because we associate that sound with a minor third. It's like, that's what a minor third sounds like.
And it also feels bigger than a second.
But yeah, right, exactly. It's too big to be a second, but we just call it a second. It's it's
written out as a second.
Right, exactly. It's like a trick you have to play with yourself, like, oh, this sounds like this one thing, but it really is this other thing, Again, This is the concept of notated sound versus real sound, right? Notated sound can be vastly different than what you're actually hearing.
Yeah, that's why I made a specific point to bring up that little trick, because that will help you sing it, even though it's not really what's going on here.
Right, right. And we actually have a so we mentioned A flat and G sharp. I just want to kind of touch on that a little bit. Those are what are called enharmonic notes, right? It's essentially one note having more than one name, right?
Yep.
And it's actually
yeah. The reality is that's not actually true, but I don't want to get into that.
Right. Yeah, there's a reason we call this music theory. Man. Anyway, so the harmonic minor scale, it has that augmented second between scale degree 6 and scale degree 7. And that is what makes a harmonic minor scale. So then there's one more of the big 3 minor scales, and that's called the melodic minor scale. And,
this is what gets rather interesting.
Yeah, this one, to me, it's always been like this one is just a major and minor scale kind of smashed together, and
in certain manners, yes, because this one's very, very weird in how it functions.
So the way that I kind of always approach this is that it basically has 2 forms, right? You have an ascending form and a descending form. Now, functionally, that is definitely not a good way to describe it, right?
Yeah, because abstractions like that are not excellent, but it will make sense when you actually hear what happens in the scale itself.
Right. The melodic minor scale, to me, functions much more closely to the harmonic minor scale than natural, Yeah,
so what actually is going on in here is that we have, let's say we're talking in C again.
Sure.
We got C, D, E flats. That's always fixed in all of your minors.
Right. So we're in C minor. So C minor. So we got C, D, and E flat. Those are going to be our
Do, Re, Mi.
Right.
And then in C minor you get F, Fa.
Right.
Then this is where we get some fun stuff happening.
Yeah.
So going up the ascending pattern, we actually go from Sol, which is again fixed in all of them, to La, Ti, Do.
Right. So from beginning to end, we've gotten Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Ti, Do. Now, the reason that I always kind of look at this as this sort of minor and major pattern smashed together is because literally it has a minor third and then a major 6 and a major 7, right? So if we're thinking in terms of C, D, E flat, F, G, and then A natural, B natural, C, right? And the last half of that is just the last half of a major scale, But
notice how we also say that that's an ascending pattern.
Exactly, right. This is what we think of when we are constructing it going up. Now,
descending is actually different because the descending pattern is actually your natural minor scale again.
The exact same thing as a natural minor scale, right? And just to reiterate, what are the intervals that we have to change in a natural minor scale?
In a natural minor scale, we have to, of course, to get minor, change Mi to Me, and then La to Le, and then Ti to Te.
So we still change those 3 patterns, or those 3 notes to fit the natural minor pattern, but it's only when we are constructing that scale going in a downward motion or descending, right?
Yeah, so going up you'll get Sol, La, Ti, Do, and going down you'll get Do, Te, Le, Sol.
Right. So theoretically, we could construct the ascending form of a melodic minor scale, but going backwards.
Theoretically, yes. The actual practice never does that.
Right, of course.
The idea behind it is that when you have the ascending pattern, you're strengthening going up to Do. So La and Ti are stronger going up into Do.
Exactly.
Whereas
So
going down, you're pulling down to sol. So te and le were stronger going down to sol.
right. And this kind of has to do with just the nature of that fifth scale degree. So when we're pulling away from so, right, la, ti, like you said, that has a stronger pull up towards our tonic note or back to do. But when we're moving away from do, generally we're going towards the note so. So those scale degrees 7 and 6, they kind of pull us back down in a way.
Yeah, so effectively we change the tendency tones again.
Right, exactly. So when we're talking about scales, the biggest, really one of the most important things that we can always remember in these scales are the tendency tones. Um, they're, again, the tones that they pull our ear in a certain direction. And it tends to be that notes that are raised, right, basically the third, the sixth, and the seventh, those are our notes that we raise in a major scale, or they're already major in a major scale, right? Those pull us towards either the notes so or do, right? Because our third is pulling us up to fa, which wants to go kind of to do, or to so, sorry. And then 6 and 7, right? Those are pulling our ear upwards towards do.
Yeah, they want to go up to do. But when we want to go in the melodic scale, melodic minor down, we want to head back to sol. So we have to adjust which way those are moving.
Right.
6 and 7. They want to, te and le want to go down into sol, whereas la and ti want to go up into do.
Yeah. Now, that's more of like a compositional kind of tool. When composers are utilizing these scales, basically what they're all good for in a way, you know, and you know, as you play these scales, something that you're going to notice is they all have different characteristics, right? They all have different qualities about them. And for instance, to me, the natural minor scale, it actually is a very neutral kind of sound because it doesn't really pull me in any direction. It's like I get that it's a dark, sad scale, but it doesn't pull me anywhere, right? It's
which is because we have the lack of the leading tone. There's
exactly
not that strong pull back to the tonic.
Right. And so it seems to me that harmonic minor scale actually has more of a a just a negative quality in a way. You know, it's like longing.
It's a corruption of the major quality in a way.
That's a good way to. Yeah, it's a corruption of the major. Ooh, that's deep. That's yeah, man. And then like the melodic minor scale has always been just a very bizarre thing, I guess. It's not like
Bartok really likes that.
yeah, right. Because it has a very weird symmetry about it, you know, like there's the sort of
you can create a cycle of going
you know?
do to sol by just using technically the same 4 pitches over and over. But
that's a very Bartok thing.
That's why I said he likes it a lot.
Yeah, right. Now, all of these scales, they really exist to pull our ear sort of in a certain direction, right? And keep a one pitch as like its center, its tonal center essentially, and which is the note we call do, right?
Yep.
Now,
and that will bring us back to do.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Right. That's the note we started at. Right. That's our home. It's our home pitch. Now, we've used this term function a little bit and sort of quality, function and quality. Now, I want to talk about quality for a second. For instance, our intervals, right? We have different qualities of interval. And we've been talking in terms of thirds, sixes, and sevenths, right? And we've used these terms major and minor, right?
Yep.
Now, what are your thoughts on the quality of an interval?
Well, that's a very interesting question, actually.
Yeah,
uh,
well, we're here to find out, man.
well, again, because I tend to think of it in terms of numbers, the sense
Yeah,
things,
yeah.
everything will kind of naturally have a certain fixed value that it will keep returning to.
Mhm.
The minor sixth will always be 800 cents because you have this is this is where I really want to start talking about how you comprise each of your intervals in terms of cents, because I think that'll make more sense that way.
Okay. Well, yeah. So essentially, though, you're thinking in terms of, like you said, cents, right? So
Yeah,
you're thinking of how many cents exist in any given interval, right? How many cents from this pitch level to this pitch level, right?
yeah, because
From
that will give you a um, fixed distance
right. Okay. Right. 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 Um, so
to go.
so then our one of the things that we kind of touched on with my class was that different intervals, they have a different number of half steps between each thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, a minor second is one half step, right?
Yep, and
Versus
that's we talked about that being 100 cents.
exactly right. So 100 cents to one half step. Now, um, we essentially get major and minor seconds, major and minor thirds, right? But the fourth and the fifth, those are a little different. Those are what was called
Yeah,
perfect,
perfect.
right? Perfect fourth and perfect fifth. Now,
There is one other one in between them that we will touch
right.
on later.
Yeah. Well, my class, we've talked about it a little bit. It's the
Okay,
tritone, but also, the augmented fourth or
the
diminished
diminished
fifth.
fifth.
Yeah. And again, that's that enharmonic kind of thing.
That is precisely it, actually.
Yeah, right. That's
Um,
where the enharmonic note kind of comes in. Now,
yeah, it's also called a tritone because it's comprised of 600 cents, which is three whole steps.
right, right. That's it.
Tritone.
Ah, yeah, 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 yeah. I always forget about that. That's true. Yeah. The tritone, there's three whole steps to get to the tritone. Yeah. Tricky, tricky medieval people.
Diabolus and Musica.
I know, right? Um, so once we get past the tritone, we get the perfect fifth, right?
Yep, then we have the major and minor sixths,
Yeah,
major and minor seventh, and then the
and
perfect
then
octave.
perfect octave. So these intervals, um, we essentially have talked about all 12 of them really just now. Um, if we're thinking in terms of cents in these intervals, right? So um, between between C to D flat, right? That is a minor second,
That is
which is
100 cents.
100 cents, right? So then the note C to D is a
It's
major second,
200.
200 cents. Same thing as two half steps, right?
Yep,
So then C to E flat,
300 cents, three half
minor
steps.
third, three half steps, right? Uh, and we can just keep playing this game all the way up, right?
Yep, there will always be a sense name, there will always be an interval name, and there will always be a semitonal name for each of these
Right.
things.
So then 800 cents.
This is where it gets interesting because this is where things start not lining up correctly with the numbers.
Ah, interesting.
Yes. So 800 cents is actually your minor sixths.
Yeah, right.
So if you're trying to think, oh, two is always going to be my second, three is always going to be my third. No, don't fall into that trap just yet.
Right, right. Also, I mean, it's the same thing with half steps though, right? Because eight half steps is a minor sixth, right?
Yep,
So 800 cents is a minor sixth.
yep.
Um, and so then, we can just kind of play that game over and over again too, like 11 half steps.
That will be your major seventh.
Major seventh, right? That's 1100 cents, which is the same thing as a major seventh, right? So, and it's also important to note that we're always relating these intervals to a given pitch, right? To a pitch. It doesn't really matter what that pitch is, right? We can take the note. Oh, sorry.
We're talking completely in abstraction here. We didn't give any fixed pitch to go relate this to, because all of these intervals will all relate to whatever pitch you put as your tonic.
Right, exactly. And so these are what we can kind of call them diatonic intervals. So for instance, in a major scale, we get a major second, right? We get a major third. You also get a perfect fourth, a perfect fifth, a major sixth, and a major seventh, right? All related to whatever your tonic note is. So those are your major diatonic intervals.
And in terms of cents, just for the record, that'll be 200 cents, 400 cents, 500 cents.
Right.
That's where the change occurs between your third and your fourth.
Right.
Because you got that half step. 700 cents.
That's your fifth.
900 cents is your sixth. 1100 cents to the seventh. And then 1200 going back to your octave.
Back to your octave. So our diatonic major intervals can also be explained using cents, right? Now, these intervals, again, they change between the major and minor systems, right? The major and minor scales. So the quality of those intervals also changes. Like the diatonic quality of those intervals changes between a major and a minor scale. So for instance, in a natural minor scale, right, we would get a tonic or a root, and then we get a major second followed by a what?
A minor third. That's
and then,
minor.
Right, because we're in a minor scale now. But these next two, they don't change, do they?
No, we got the perfect fourth and the perfect fifth.
Right. So the perfect intervals, oh, hey, someone is here. Hang on just a second. Okay, sorry about that.
You had to get a pizza.
Yeah, I wish it was a pizza. So we were talking about these scales, right, and the intervals that make up the minor scales.
Yep, we went up through the fifth already. Right.
So we talked about the root, the major second, the minor third, the perfect fourth, and perfect fifth. And again, those intervals, they stay the same, didn't they, between all the scales? That's kind of why they're perfect in a way.
If you get an augmented fourth or a diminished fifth, you are outside of the diatonic scale.
Right. You're doing it wrong. Now, it is important to note that those notes do exist inside of the scale, but they're kind of between different types of things inside of the scale.
We'll get to that.
Yeah. But if we're relating everything to a tonic, to a root note, to do, then that interval
is outside of a diatonic collection.
Right. It doesn't really exist in a diatonic form in that sense. Now, in a harmonic minor scale, for instance, after we get the perfect fourth and the perfect fifth, we get the minor sixth. But remember, this one is the one that's a little bit different, isn't it?
Yeah, because we had to get that leading tone back somehow, so we had to raise it.
Right. And how many cents did we have to add to that again?
We had to add 100 cents.
Exactly 100 cents. Right. So that 100 cents, now we've created a specific type of interval between the sixth and the seventh.
And we talked about this not too long ago.
I know. Let's just reiterate it, though, for all the folks at home.
I know. I'm just saying that we're going over some material. We called that an augmented second.
Right. The augmented second. So in order to keep the continuity.
Pardon me.
Yeah, move away from the mic to breathe in. In order to keep in order to keep sort of some semblance of continuity, right? We definitely have diatonic intervals inside of the harmonic minor scale, right? So we just got to the minor sixth. Now, because of that augmented second, right, we added 100 cents back and we got a leading tone, right? What kind of seventh exists in that that harmonic minor scale?
Because we've added that 100 cents back to a minor seventh, we now have a major seventh.
Right. So in a harmonic minor scale, then we get a minor sixth and a major seventh, don't we?
Exactly that.
Right. So we can also kind of think then that the difference between harmonic minor scale and a major scale is just the sixth and the seventh, then, isn't it? If we're thinking in terms of parallels.
The third and the sixth.
The third and the sixth. Yeah, what did I say? The sixth and the seventh?
Yes.
Right, the third and the sixth, right? Those are the different scale degrees between a major and harmonic minor scale. Because we keep that major seventh.
Yep.
Now,
in all minor scales, you will have the minor third.
Right, because the very next scale we have to talk about, right, is the melodic minor. And just like the natural and harmonic minor, it too has a minor third, right? That's the only one that's kind of fixed in our minor scales.
Yep,
and again,
because of the tonic triad is minor.
Right. To me, that's what really gives the quality of a scale, is the third. You know, the major scales, there are other types of major scales. We're going to keep that on the DL for now, right? But they all have a major third, right? The minor scales, they definitely all have a minor third, don't they?
They have to. It's in the name.
Right. They have to. It's in the name. So the diatonic intervals of a melodic minor scale, this is a little tricky, isn't it?
Yes, because as we said before, there is an ascending collection and then there is a descending collection.
Right. So
now it's actually maybe a little easier to think about this than maybe as initially thought.
Oh,
what's the difference between the ascending pattern of a melodic minor and a major scale? Just a minor third.
Right.
And then the descending pattern is the exact same as the natural minor.
Exactly. So if we're thinking of a descending melodic minor scale, for instance, we're going to get a minor seventh and a minor sixth, right?
Precisely.
But if we're thinking of the ascending melodic minor pattern,
we get the major sixth and the major seventh.
Right. Now, again, it really matters like the direction of this scale, right? That's why we're using the terms ascending versus descending, right? In the construction of these scales. Again, their function is slightly different, right? How they're used is a little bit different than how they're constructed. Now, for thinking of this sort of descending version, right? It's almost like when things are descending, they're moving in reverse in a way.
Yeah, this is the minor scale where your descending is actually not the same as moving in reverse because you actually have to change the intervals.
Right, exactly. This one, again, it's different going down, right?
Yeah,
so if we're to think of it,
when you are going down, think of your natural minor.
Right. So if we're to use solfege to create a melodic minor scale, let's start with the ascending pattern. It would be do,
re,
and then me,
fa, sol, la, ti, do.
Right. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Now going down though, right? We have to alter the seventh and the sixth.
Yep. So going down, we would have do, te, le, sol, fa, me, re,
and
do.
Now, let's just try some note names on that. Let's keep it simple. Let's do E. E melodic minor.
Okay.
So our first note clearly is going to be the note E, right? That's the
It's
start.
easy for you because you're a bassist and your bottom string is E.
It's an easy scale though. It only has what? Technically, it only has one sharp in the key signature, right?
Technically. I know.
So we get
I'm pointing out something as a tuba player. I'm a little more privy to flats, and he's a little
right.
more privy to sharps.
Yeah, that's true. F minor would have been a good one for you then, huh?
It's all still buttons. It's all still notes to push down. I'm just making a point that we come from different backgrounds.
Oh yeah, no, I know. So let's go back to E because I like that key quite a bit. It is quite easy to play in.
Yeah. We have E.
Right.
Then F sharp.
F sharp. I'm telling my class right now actually to use this system of sh and f for notes. Like, so all the sharp notes, you say sh at the end of it, right? So this would be E, F, sh, G,
Okay.
and then
fine. Okay.
so
starting
it's
over.
small, whatever.
Yeah.
E.
So we got E, F, sh, G,
A,
B, C,
sh,
D,
sh, and finally E. Yeah.
Now going the other way.
Right. So now we have to alter some things, don't we?
Yes. Remember, we have to alter 6 and 7.
Right. So going down, we get what?
We have E, D, C, B, A, G,
and we still get
F,
sh, and
E.
E. Yeah. So then that's our E melodic minor. Now the intervals inside of that, right? Oh, we already talked about that, didn't we? The intervals that make up that scale, right? The 6 and the 7
that was
are
what
different.
we were headed towards.
Is that whatever? Let's talk about it anyway. Yeah. So the intervals that make up that scale, right? We definitely have a minor third because they're all minor third, right?
It's in the name.
It's in the name. You get a perfect fourth and a perfect fifth. It's also all important to note that basically every scale that we've talked about so far has a major second also.
Yes. Now, when you get into weird stuff, that's not always true.
Yeah.
But for your majors and your minors, it's always a major second.
Right. Hang on just 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. So we definitely have a tonic, right? Our tonic note. We have a major second. We have a minor third in all of these scales. We have
all the minor scales.
Right, all the minor scales. Actually, all scales have a major second. They all have a perfect fourth and a perfect fifth.
Yep. If you have anything other than that, you don't have a major or minor collection.
What is that?
Something else. Cut the thing.
No. It's funny. Well, what is it?
I have a train clock over here from when I was
younger. That's cool. I was like I recognize that sound. What is it? Anyway, okay.
Yeah, I have a train clock.
That's fun.
I can show it to you later if you want.
Yeah. Okay, so now after the perfect fourth and the perfect fifth, things get, again, a little bit different here, don't they?
Yep, we've gone through all the ones, the major seconds, the perfect fourth, and the perfect fifth that are in everything.
Right, the minor third that's in all the minor scales.
Yep, with this, then as we said before, the 6 and the 7, there is a little bit of give and take here. In the natural minor, you always will have the minor 6 and the minor 7th.
Right.
That is completely without alterations.
So, ascending, we get a major 6 and a major 7th, right? Because we have the melodic tone.
Minor.
Right, melodic minor.
I was talking about natural minor a moment ago.
Well, right, because that's the descending form, essentially.
Yes, so, okay, we're on the same page.
Oh, yeah. So
when you ascend, you get the major 6 and the major 7th. When you descend, you get the minor 6 and the minor 7th.
Exactly. Now, I think that there is something really important about those perfect intervals, right? They exist in all the scales. you know.
Yep, they have no quality of major or minor.
Right. That's a really important note also, is that perfect intervals.
Ah.
Yeah. I'm so punny. Uh, the perfect intervals, they don't have an inherent quality, right? Perfect doesn't mean that it's good or bad, I guess. It doesn't mean that it's major or minor. It's not happy or sad. It's not dark. It's not light. It's a very neutral sound, right? It actually, to me, it always supports like, whenever you play a perfect interval, they always support one of the tones, right? It's like it's supporting the other tone in a way.
Yes, the fourth uses the tonic to support the fourth.
Right, exactly.
And the fifth supports the tonic.
Right.
And there's a reason
itself.
for that.
Well, yeah, right. Because, well, actually, why don't you explain that? I think you would have a better view of that, actually.
All right. So the reason that I just said the perfect fourth has the fourth getting supported by the root and the fifth supports the root itself, is because the two perfect intervals are inversionally related to one another. So when I say inversion, I mean I can take what's the perfect fourth, move the F down an octave, invert it over another pitch, and I'll get a different interval, even though I have the same notes.
Right. So for instance, you use the note F. So if we're to sort of just think about this, let's use the notes C and F, right?
Mm-hmm.
C up to F is a perfect fourth, or a generic fourth, really. We can sort of think of it as, right? C, D, E, F. Right.
If we're thinking about it diatonically, it is a perfect fourth.
Diatonically, it is a perfect fourth, right? That's when we're trying to qualify this interval, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're all generic intervals, sixths, sevenths. They're all.
If I say a seventh, it could be a major seventh and minor seventh, and augmented seventh and diminished seventh. I don't know what it could be until I qualify it.
Exactly. We qualify it with perfect, major, minor, augmented, or diminished, not in any particular order. Now,
because there's no such thing as a perfect seventh.
Yeah, right. It just doesn't exist. So when we're talking about inverting these intervals, we've talked a little bit about this in my class, and it's a challenge, I think, for some people to kind of think of at first, because for me, I've always had to envision this in some form, either on staff paper, at a keyboard, or something, and it takes a lot of, like, for me, there's like a process that I had to go through, I guess, to really think of inverting an interval. Now, if we take F and C, right, C up to F, let's say, that was a perfect fourth, right?
Yep. And now, if we take the F and move it down the octave,
it becomes
a perfect fifth.
A perfect fifth, right? Because now we're not thinking of C to F anymore. We're thinking
F to C.
C, exactly. And F to C is a generic fifth, right? F, G, A, B, C, right? Mm-hmm. And it just happens to also be a perfect fifth, right? So when we're inverting these intervals,
you take whatever one of the notes is and move it by octave up or down.
Exactly,
in relation to another note.
Right. Now, there is also a way to think of this, like a shortcut. I was always taught to use the number 9, right? So, for instance, C up to F is a fourth, right? The difference between 9 and 4 is 5. So F up to C, or C down to F, would be a fifth, right?
Yeah, that is one way to do it, because then you're subtracting whatever your first one is from 9.
And now it's really important to note, though, that this only works for intervals inside of an octave, right? If you go past the octave,
it does not work.
It does not work at all.
You'll have to add, you can use this, but you'll have to add an octave or two.
Right. It gets kind of difficult, you could say. Now, again, if you're just working inside of the octave, the magic number is 9. That's the difference. So, for instance, if we have a sixth going up, and we move that sixth down an octave,
we have to think 9 minus 6, which becomes 3.
A 3, right? Now, when we did C to F, that was a perfect interval, right? C up to F was a perfect fourth. we move that F down an octave and it becomes a perfect fifth, right? So
Yes,
perfect intervals, they stay perfect when we invert them,
because they're absolutely perfect.
right? They are perfect just the way they are.
I like you just the way you are.
Uh, now, the same does not hold true for major and minor intervals, though.
Correct, because when you invert a major, you will create a minor interval. And if you
Right.
invert a minor interval, you will create a major interval.
So essentially, whenever you're inverting major or minor intervals, whatever note you're inverting to, it takes the opposite quality that it came from. So we used the example of a sixth earlier, right? And the inversion of a sixth is a third. Now, if we were to have a major sixth, if we were to invert that major sixth, it would become a what?
It would become a minor third.
A minor third, because we
Like,
had a six on top, right? Magic
and
number is 9, it becomes a 3, and then that major
becomes
inverts
minor.
to minor, right? Sorry, I kept cutting you off.
Yeah, because whenever I was about to say, let's say, for example, we go from C to A. That is a minor 6. Let's go through it again. 9 minus 6 is 3. That
Right?
A moves down to become a 3. And because that was a major 6, it now becomes a minor third.
Exactly. Because whenever we invert, right, we have to invert the quality essentially as well. This is kind
Except
of,
for perfect.
except for perfect, right? Perfect are perfect just the way they are.
Getting all Mr. Rogers up in this joint.
I know, right? So this sort of like inversional thing, I actually use this a lot, like to think of intervals. I invert intervals kind of all the time in my head. Um, for instance, I think it's easier to think of a third than a sixth, you know, and a sixth and a third are essentially the same thing, just at different like space pitch levels. Um,
Careful with that. They're functionally different.
sure, they are. This is true. They are functionally different. Yes, a third definitely acts differently than a sixth because a sixth is bigger than a third. First off, right now,
Yep, and its tendency is different than that of a third.
exactly right. It has a different tendency than a third. Now, when I'm using these inversional tricks, really it's trying to just figure out quick key changes or relationships between chords, for instance. Now, I don't want to get too far into that quite yet, but one application that we can use for this is to kind of harken back to the very beginning of this sort of talk when we were talking about the relative major and minor scales, right? The the way to think about finding a relative minor scale, right, is to find, well, it's not the way, but one way to think about this, right, is to find the sixth scale degree above your starting note, right? And we also said, though, that we can just go 3 notes down or like find the third note below it.
Yep, because as we said just a moment ago, this is an inversional relation.
Right. What we have done when we go 6 notes up or 3 notes down, what we're doing is just moving one of those notes down an octave, right? 6 notes up, down an octave is the same thing as 3 notes down. The flip side of this is that 3 notes down is essentially the same thing as 6 notes up an octave.
Mm-hmm.
And this is true for literally every diatonic interval that exists inside of a major scale. It's also true for chromatic intervals too.
Yeah, so that starts getting muddy.
Right. But the big takeaway, I think, from this is that it has to be inside of an octave. We can only do this trick when it's inside of an octave. Now, is there a name for these kind of like intervals that stay inside of an octave? Because I know, for instance, intervals that go outside of an octave, we call them compound intervals because we have to compound numbers. But
I've always just referred to them. I don't know if this is the exact name that people use for it, but since we always refer to things like simple and compound meter, I've always referred to it as simple and
yeah,
compound interval.
right. Simple intervals versus compound intervals. That makes sense. Now, Compound intervals are slightly more tricky, but
they're not the trickiest thing in the world, actually.
Right. Basically, we just keep going past 8, right? So, for instance, if we were to count from 1 to 8, we would get to an octave, right? That would be A to A. But if we were to go to the next note, that would be B, right? And we have a B down here at the 2 position, right? So if we're 1 past an octave, we essentially just add a number, right? So we just go to the number 9.
Number 9?
The number 9, right? So just like we can get major and minor seconds, we can also get major and minor ninths as well. And again, a ninth is just an interval that's 1 beyond an octave.
Precisely. And when you want to think of it, you just think of your smaller simple interval and then add an octave to it.
Right, exactly. And you just keep playing this game, go to 10.
That's your third plus an octave.
Right. The 11th.
Now, remember, one thing to note, you're not directly adding 2 to 8 to get to that.
Oh, right. This is why the whole 9 trick when you're inverting doesn't really work with these things. I've actually always just taken the difference between whatever that number is and 8. Slightly harder math, I guess.
You have to subtract 8 from it to get the interval between the 2 notes.
Yeah, right.
So if you want to think of it, here's another way to think of it. Subtract 7 from it.
Right. Yeah, sorry, that took a second to click, but yeah, that makes sense. Yep. Because 9 minus 7 is
2.
2, right?
8 minus 7 is 1, which gets you the exact interval.
Right. Yeah, man, how have I never put that together before? Whoa.
I'm going to let you in on something. I kind of thought of that right now.
That's funny. Well, hey, man, that's what we're here for, right? So when we're inverting intervals, again, we can invert simple intervals, right? Those are inside of an octave.
And we also can invert the compound intervals.
Right, we can invert compound intervals too. Now, again, we're not using the same, we're using the sort of same methodology, right? We're taking a number from another number, but we have to approach it kind of in a different way, because once you get into compound interval land, you're really moving far kind of outside of your tonic pitch, Excuse me.
Yeah, because in order to correctly invert a compound interval, you need to maintain its octave displacement.
Right.
Against that interval.
Right.
So you'll have to, if you invert by a ninth, you have to maintain that octave distance.
Right. Yeah, those are some kind of tricky things, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm going to be honest here, I have yet to encounter much of an instance where I've been inverting compound intervals.
Yeah, right. I think the only real reason to even try to invert them is to just figure out what the interval is. Because a ninth and a second are different things, right? But we can figure out what the note of a ninth is by understanding that it's just a second,
Yeah, because if you think that 9 minus 2 is 7, then you have to add an octave to the 7th, so you get a displacement of a 15th.
Yeah, right. So things get kind of bizarre. Luckily enough, though, I don't really ever encounter many things that are intervals that are compounded that far apart. At most it's usually a 10th, sometimes an 11th.
It's a 14th. 15th is the double octave.
Right, 15th is a double octave. Yeah. 14th is the 7th or the second, I guess.
So precisely why this stuff gets a little complicated.
Right. So Usually when we're inverting intervals, though, we tend to only be inverting basic intervals.
Yeah.
And we are usually inverting an interval based around some center pitch. Maybe not necessarily a tonic pitch, but a center pitch, right? A tonic implies that we have a scale that we're working with. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's
well,
not
man.
true of all musics.
Oh, that's very true. There are very few hard and concrete sort of rules in music. Most of this stuff is extremely malleable.
Yeah, really, you can get into, if you find a rule, I can find you 5 examples of that rule being broken.
Oh, of course. Of course. Okay, so that's really it for today, man. We've talked for quite a bit, actually.
Yeah, we've almost hit 2 hours.
I know, man. Great, with some pauses in between, but
Well, those were a matter of like a minute or 2.
yeah, right. Well, again, Ian, thank you so much. This is my good friend, Ian Wiese. And again, yeah, thanks so much for helping me out with this. Hopefully we'll find time to do this again. I'd like to talk to you about some other topics,
I'd be happy to do it again, especially considering that all what's going on, we don't have as much going on.
Yeah, man. Just trying to stay sane. Woo.
That's easier said sometimes.
Yeah, I know, right? Well, all right. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here. And, class, you should have watched to this point anyway. All right. Bye.
Bye.